Hello and welcome back to my Valentino Bay city build series on Cities Skylines 1. In the last episode, we built this industrial area outside the train cargo hub. It's a mix of industry buildings, warehouses with some facilities like recycling, police and fire, and it's all joined together with detailing. Now that we have loads of generic industry in the city, they really need staff. I'm having to reset the buildings every few minutes because they keep trying to remove themselves. So what we're going to focus on today is housing, specifically low-income, high-rise housing inspired by post-Soviet countries like Bulgaria and Serbia. I downloaded a bunch of assets off the workshop for this, and it's the first time I'm trying out this kind of build, but I did a little test run and I think it works really well. You may have noticed that the landscape looks a little bit different to what it did last episode. I changed the theme slightly so that the hills weren't as sandy as before, and I used a new LUT to balance out the colours a little bit. This is still the Seenu Atoll theme, but it's now using the cliff texture from the Reaper Miami theme and the Reaper Real Blue colour correction. So we're going to be working on this piece of land here. The flats are going to sit right up against the highway. So they're not necessarily the most desirable flats in the city. If anything, they're ones that you live in because you've got no other choice, rather than because you want to live there. But they're mostly going to be to supply workers for the nearby industrial area. I'm not going to be putting down many high schools so we can keep the education of the workers relatively low. And of course, people will still come from all over the map to work here, but the industrial area really needs workers, so that's what I'm going to give them. This area is going to be quite grubby. There's going to be lots of cracked and dirty decals all over the place. There's some quite simple and barren inner city parks. So it's going to be very, very different to the district that we've already done on the other side of the map. So let me get stuck into building. Okay, so here is the start of our low-income Soviet-inspired residential area. I'm not the most clued up when it comes to this style of architecture and the history, so I may have put a bunch of stuff together that would never normally go together in real life, but I think it works quite well in this game, especially next to the industrial area and the highway. While I was building, I was thinking about the backstory for this area, and I like the idea that this started out as the big city once upon a time, and this is where all of the rich up-and-coming people wanted to live. They wanted to live in the high-rise buildings. They want to have easy access onto the highways. But slowly over time, as things progressed, this area got more and more run down when people got sick of the noise, they got sick of the trucks. So they eventually moved away to other parts of the city that were a bit more appealing, and this area was kind of left to those with a low income, and it fell into a bit of a state of disrepair. So I haven't done much detailing yet, but let me take you on a little tour and give you the kind of lore of each of these areas. So I've used some of these curved front buildings to work with some angles that aren't quite 90 degrees. This is more of a continuous flow block, and this has some independent pieces kind of all jumbled together, and I'm going to do some detailing in the middle to kind of bring them all together. But they do have these kind of bits on the side here that slot together. They're two modular pieces, but as you can see, they kind of tessellate and tile a little bit like these parts over here. This is three of the buildings stuck together with a little basketball court outside. And this is a gymnasium. It's actually a park, so it won't function as a healthcare block like the in-game gymnasium, but it looks like it fits with this kind of very brutalist vibe. And I put some parking in because there's not very much parking in this area at all. I like to think that when they were building this place, they didn't really think about parking. They just wanted to get the high-rise buildings up as quickly as possible. And it was a bit of an afterthought, so there's probably going to be lots of cars parked on the roads, and people will be fighting for these spaces here. This section here is what I like to think is the more wealthy people wanted to live in, because the buildings are a little bit further apart. They've got some green spaces in the middle, and I'm going to be doing some detailing, adding a few trees and a few props around there to make it really look like that was meant to be the wealthy area. But as it's so close to the highway, people very quickly got sick of the noise and all of the wealthy people moved away. I'm fairly sure we have some of these types of buildings in the UK. Again, I'm going to be doing some detailing in the middle, but I wanted to break up this kind of blocky feel and add some buildings that are a little bit further apart. And you know what? These buildings would actually have quite a nice view if the area wasn't so run down, because we've got the mountains on this side and they can probably see down to the coast on this side, but unfortunately they're just not very stylish anymore. Then there's some modular blocks along the back here. There's not very much light getting in the middle there. And this one has a bit of an open space, but it's very, very dingy. I can imagine the people that live on the ground floor would have a very, very dark flat. Some light coming in through the front, but if you face out on this way, you're not going to be getting much natural light in there at all. And the same with this block over here. There's a very, very small bit in the middle, but they're not going to be getting very much natural light, and it's going to be very, very noisy. I can imagine that the people in these blocks are going to be complaining about health very soon. And we're probably going to need to put down some healthcare in this block so that they don't keep moving out and the buildings get demolished. Down here is an elementary school. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm not going to be putting many high schools here. I want to keep the residents of this area fairly lowly educated so that we have workers for the industrial area. But I thought this primary school went really, really well with the theme of this district. It's very blocky, very low, very flat, and even though it has loads of park detailing out the side, it's not exactly the most appealing elementary school in the world. It does look kind of similar to a lot of schools that you get in the UK, but it kind of fits in with the rest of the vibe of this district. And then finally over here, this is the really wealthy block. Like I said earlier, I am not an expert on this style of architecture. I just see a lot of stuff like this on Instagram, and it does have some appeal. Even though it's such a cold style of architecture, I am very much drawn to it. So this kind of setup might be something that just would never exist in the real world, but I thought these kind of statues and monuments were very common in post-Soviet countries. I see a lot of these kind of concrete monuments in different cities that I see on Instagram and TikTok. So I thought I would use this park here and kind of make this block feel like this was where the uber wealthy people live. These buildings here have a little bit more of detailing on than the other ones do. It's almost like a kind of art deco thing on the front. I might be getting that wrong, but they feel a little bit nicer than some of the other buildings. They just feel a little bit cleaner. So my thinking was the richest people in this district lived right next to the monument. They wanted to look out right over the top of it, and they also wanted people to look at them living right next to the monument to know that they were the wealthy ones. But as with the rest of the district, they got sick of the noise, they got sick of the traffic, so they eventually moved away, and this block became like all of the others, where it was a little bit more run down for low educated people, low income families, people who work in the industrial area, and all of the appeal of these what once were sought after high rise buildings has completely gone. Now that it's been running for a little bit in the background, you can see it's getting very, very busy here. There's going to be a lot of people moving into these buildings. I'm fairly sure that the big ones have a very high capacity on them, so this is going to be drawing in a hell of a lot more people down this way. I haven't quite thought out yet how I'm going to do the road from the industrial area onto the highway. I may need to give it its own dedicated intersection up here so that the trucks aren't trying to fight through all of the residential traffic, and this is obviously going to grow over time. It isn't going to stay as this one small block, and it's going to grow out towards the industrial area with some commercial and a few more facilities, and it's going to grow down towards the intersection as well. So I'm just going to do a little bit of detailing on some of these blocks, and then I'll do a final run through at the end. Okay, I think that is the detailing done. I didn't want to do too much and make it too overly complicated and busy, especially as we're still very early on in this build, and the more stuff we add, the more it's going to work on my computer, and by the end of it, it's going to be completely unusable. So I tried to keep things very simple, using the same trees throughout, and put a bit more attention into the blocks that were meant to be high-end. So you probably saw as I was detailing that I've been putting some of these swings around with some of these oak trees and a few of the kind of ground level sprites. This area has been fenced off with a pathway running down the middle and some benches. There's not very much detailing in the middle of these because they aren't meant to be for very high income people, so they don't have loads of amenities. There's an invisible path running through the middle of these two buildings with some tree detailing. There's some stains down the centre of this one. I wanted to put some clotheslines in, but it turns out I didn't have any in my library. I thought I had some, so I'll probably add that in the future, but the cracked and stained details do kind of add to the middle of that, making it really feel like there hasn't been very much attention on it at all. And then over here I just used some trees and some bushes and put some little walls out the fronts of the buildings just to kind of separate it from the general population. And I also connected the back of the buildings to the plaza so that the people who live here can walk straight out into the main attraction to this area. As you can see, this area is getting really busy now. This one relatively small complex has more than doubled the overall population in this city, and it's got rid of all of the staffing issues in the industrial quarter. Like I mentioned earlier, it will be built on over time. I will be adding more to it, and I already have plans for the next few episodes for adding some commercial and some interesting geographical features to this area and to extend the lore into other parts of the city. It's a bit cryptic, but you will see what I mean soon. Let me know what you think of this build in the comments, and if you have any name suggestions for this district, please do let me know. Like I said, I am not the most educated on this type of architecture, so if you know more than I do, please remember that this is just a game. I'm not trying to make the most realistic, accurate to the real world recreation of a Soviet town. This is just a bunch of stuff that I thought looked good together, and I hope you agree. As always, you can find extra content on my TikTok and Instagram. It's the same username as on here. You might even get an early look at some of the future builds, and you can also request deeper looks into any parts of my builds, both ones that I'm doing as YouTube series and my own personal builds. But anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.